Have you ever walked through the ruins of an ancient Roman villa and wondered what life was truly like within those walls? We often picture the senators in their togas, the legionaries on the march, or the gladiators in the arena. But the real pulse of a wealthy Roman home, its rhythm and its very survival, depended on a figure we rarely hear about, a person whose story is woven into the very fabric of daily life, yet remains largely in the shadows. This is the story of the villa housekeeper, the individual who stood at the very center of the household's universe, a role of immense responsibility, quiet influence, and often hidden peril. Picture not the grand public spectacles, but the private world behind closed doors, a world of intricate social codes, cherished treasures, and the constant, delicate balance of power between those who owned the villa and those who made it function. It was a world where a single mistake could mean disgrace, and where trust was the most valuable currency of all. Imagine the weight of that responsibility resting on your shoulders. You are the steward of everything the family holds dear. Your morning begins not with a gentle sunrise, but with the immense task of coordinating an entire hidden workforce, dozens of slaves, each with a specialized duty, from the cook preparing elaborate meals with exotic spices to the scribe meticulously recording household accounts. You are the manager, the accountant, and the chief of security, all rolled into one. Your keen eye must catch every detail. Is the silver polished to a brilliant shine? Are the stores of grain and wine sufficient to last the winter? Has the master's most prized possession, a carved gemstone passed down through generations, been securely stored away? This was a life lived under a microscope, where your competence was measured in the smooth silence of a well-run home, a silence that could be shattered in an instant by a theft, a betrayal, or a simple error in judgment. So today we are stepping directly into those worn sandals. We're going to explore the untold story of the Roman villa housekeeper, peeling back the layers of history to reveal the daily routines, the guarded secrets, and the surprising authority of this pivotal role. We will uncover what it truly took to manage a wealthy Roman household, from overseeing the complex hierarchy of servants to protecting the family's fortunes and their reputation. This is a journey into a life filled with quiet intrigue, potential danger, and a form of power that was rarely acknowledged but absolutely essential. It's a story of the person who truly kept the heart of the villa beating, and it's a perspective on ancient Rome that will forever change how you see the past. Your day will begin in the deep pre-dawn darkness, long before the first rays of sun touch the villa's red-tiled roof. The household is asleep, but your duties are already calling. Your first act is not a managerial one, but a spiritual one. You approach the small, sacred shrine, the Lararium, where the statues of the Lares and Penates, the protective spirits of the household, and the storeroom reside. You offer a quiet prayer, a few grains of incense, or a sprinkle of wine. This wasn't just a formality, it was a crucial ritual to secure the god's favor for the entire household. A misstep here, a forgotten offering, could be seen as an omen for a day of misfortune, a burden no housekeeper would ever want to carry. With the blessings of the gods sought, your practical work commences. The silence of the villa is punctuated by your soft footsteps as you make your first rounds. You check on the night watchmen, ensuring they haven't succumbed to sleep, a failure that could leave the entire family vulnerable to theft. You move toward the sounds of the first laborers already at their posts, the bakers and the millers. You hear the heavy, grinding sound of the millstones, often turned by donkeys or the most unfortunate of slaves, beginning the process that will provide bread for the entire household. Your sharp eyes assess their progress. A delay here means hungry, irritable servants and a displeased master. As a faint glow appears on the horizon, your supervision intensifies, shifting from the outer, functional areas to the very heart of the home, the atrium. This grand open-roofed reception hall was the public face of the family's wealth and status. Before the master awakes, you ensure the intricate mosaic floor has been meticulously swept and then lightly sprinkled with fine, colored sand or powdered marble to absorb dust and create a fresh, clean scent. Every pillar must be wiped down, the decorative pool, the impluvium, must be clear of leaves and debris. This space had to be immaculate, a silent testament to your flawless management the moment any guest stepped inside. Your path then leads you to the kitchens, a world of controlled chaos that you must bring to order. The air is thick with the smell of burning olive wood, and the scent of yesterday's bread being warmed. You consult with the head cook, reviewing the menu for the day. Is there enough fish from the morning's market? Has the wine been mixed with water to the proper ratio? Are the dormice fattened for a special appetizer being prepared correctly? You inspect the stores of grain, oil, and wine, mentally calculating if they will last the week. This constant low-level anxiety about provisions was a permanent part of the job. A shortage was not just an inconvenience, but a direct reflection of your poor planning. All of this bustling activity, this entire symphony of domestic life, is conducted under your quiet command while the dominus and domina rest peacefully in their chambers, completely unaware of the intricate machine you've set in motion to ensure their day begins in comfort and splendor. As the household begins to stir around you, your focus narrows to the most critical space in the entire villa, the atrium. This isn't just a room, it is the beating heart of the Roman home, a grand public stage where the family's social standing and your own managerial prowess are put on display for every guest and client. Your presence here is not merely supervisory, it is performative. You are the director ensuring that every element of this daily theater unfolds flawlessly. The open roof or compluvium allows a shaft of morning light to illuminate the central pool, the impluvium, which you ensured was spotless just moments ago. This pool was far more than decorative. It was a vital water source channeling rainwater into an underground cistern, and its clarity was a direct reflection of the household's discipline and your attention to detail. Your authority is most palpable here in this formal space, as the master begins his morning ritual of receiving a line of clients, petitioners, and business associates. You are the quiet force that makes it all possible. Stationed discreetly near a small wooden desk or a scroll cabinet, you manage the pulse of the household's economy. Your stylus moves across a wax tablet, recording distributions of food from the storerooms, payments to outside artisans, or notes on supplies that need replenishing. A client might approach the master for a favor, but it is often you who later ensures the promised sum of grain or wine is actually measured out and delivered. Your command of these accounts gives you a form of soft power that is both immense and delicate. A single error in your records could lead to a significant financial loss or, worse, a public accusation of theft or incompetence. Every object in the atrium tells a story of the family's lineage and wealth, and you are its chief curator. Your eyes constantly sweep the room, noting the placement of the ancestor busts, the sheen on the display silver, and the fresh flowers placed near the lararium. A dusty bust would imply disrespect for the family's history. A tarnished bowl would suggest negligence. You understand that in Roman society, perception is reality. A visitor's entire impression of the dominus could be shaped by the order they witness in his atrium. It is your relentless, unseen effort that creates that illusion of effortless prosperity, an image so perfect it seems the villa almost runs itself. This is the ultimate testament to your skill, making immense complexity appear as simple, serene order. Perhaps the most tangible symbol of your authority was the heavy ring of keys you carried, a metallic weight that rested against your hip with every step you took. This wasn't just a collection of iron implements, it was the physical manifestation of the family's trust, granting you sole access to the lifeblood of the villa. That jangling ring unlocked the deep storerooms, the horia, where towering amphorae of olive oil and jars of precious garum fish sauce were kept under your watchful count. It opened the doors to the cellars where wine aged in massive barrels, and it secured the chests containing the family's fine linens, their imported silks, and the silver plate used to impress guests at lavish dinners. But the ultimate object of your responsibility, the one that likely caused a knot of anxiety in your stomach, was the arca, the strongbox. This heavy, iron-bound chest was the heart of the family's financial world. Within its reinforced wooden walls lay the family's cash reserves, bags of gold ore, silver denarii, and smaller bronze coins for daily market purchases. It might also hold the family's most important legal documents, wills, deeds of ownership, and loan agreements. You were the guardian of this box, and its security was your paramount concern. It was often kept in a discreet, windowless room, or sometimes even chained to the floor. You alone decided when it was opened, meticulously recording every deposit and withdrawal on your wax tablets. The sound of that heavy lock turning was a sound only you were meant to make. a daily reminder that the economic stability of an entire noble lineage rested, quite literally, in your hands. This immense responsibility bred a constant, low-level fear that was your constant companion. The threat of theft was ever present, a shadow in the corner of every well-lit room. While you worried about burglars from the outside, the more insidious and probable danger came from within the household itself. You managed dozens, sometimes hundreds of enslaved individuals, each with their own motivations and desperation. A kitchen slave might pilfer a sack of grain to trade for a small luxury. A cleaner might pocket a stray coin left on a table. Your greatest nightmare, however, was a coordinated conspiracy, a plot involving several servants to secretly duplicate a key and empty a storeroom, or worse, the Arca itself. This fear made you a constant observer, not just of tasks, but of people. You learned to read subtle shifts in behavior, a sudden nervousness or an unexplained possession that might hint at dishonesty. When a theft did occur, the burden of investigation and judgment fell squarely upon you. You were the household's chief magistrate in these matters. The process was swift and brutal, with little room for the legal niceties of the public courts. You would gather the suspected slaves, question them, and if the culprit wasn't readily discovered, the entire group might be held collectively responsible. The punishment for stealing from the dominus was severe, designed as a brutal deterrent for others. A slave caught in a significant theft could be whipped, branded on the forehead with a mark of shame, or even sentenced to hard labor in the dreaded mills or mines, a virtual death sentence. This power to discipline was a grim aspect of your role, a necessary harshness that underlined the profound stakes of your position. Protecting the family's wealth wasn't just about managing objects, it was about controlling a small society where temptation was everywhere, and your vigilance was the only thing standing between order and chaos. But beyond the silent, static security of locked storerooms and strongboxes, your most volatile and complex responsibility was managing the human machinery of the villa itself. You were the overseer of a small, self-contained city of enslaved people, a workforce that could number in the dozens for a moderately wealthy family, or swell into the hundreds for a true senatorial elite. This wasn't a faceless mob of laborers, it was a finely tuned orchestra of specialists, and you were its conductor, tasked with ensuring every individual played their part in perfect harmony. Your first and most crucial daily duty was the assignment of tasks, a logistical puzzle that required a deep understanding of each person's skill, temperament, and the household's shifting priorities. You would move through the bustling servants' quarters at dawn, your mental ledger of duties already forming. The roles were highly specialized, almost like guilds within the household. Your most trusted and discreet slaves were the cubicularii, the personal attendants to the master and mistress. These individuals were granted intimate access to the private bedchambers, responsible for dressing their owners, assisting with their morning ablutions, and even guarding the door while they slept. Their loyalty was paramount. A disgruntled cubicularius could whisper slander or, in the most extreme fears, pose a direct physical threat. Then came the vestiplici, the experts in charge of the family's extensive and expensive wardrobe. They didn't just fold clothes, they were masters of textile care, knowing how to brush and store heavy woolen togas to prevent moths, how to air out delicate silks, and how to remove stains from fine linens. A mistake here could ruin a garment worth a small fortune. Simultaneously, you were directing the gardeners tending the ornamental hedges, the stable hands grooming the horses for a potential afternoon ride, and the teams of cleaners whose endless work maintained the villa's spotless appearance. Maintaining discipline and morale within this intricate hierarchy was a constant, delicate balancing act, a dance between the carrot and the stick. You understood that a contented slave was an efficient and loyal one, while a miserable servant was a looming catastrophe. A resentful cook could easily sabotage a banquet by oversalting a dish, ruining the family's social standing in front of important guests. A despairing stable hand could neglect a valuable horse, leading to its illness or injury. Worse yet, a conspiracy of discontent could lead to theft, arson, or even attempted murder. Because of this ever-present risk, you had to be a shrewd judge of character. Minor infractions might be met with a sharp reprimand or a reduction in rations, but you also knew the power of incentives. An exceptionally diligent slave might be rewarded with a better cut of meat, a small monetary tip, or the highly coveted promise of eventual freedom. Your goal was to foster a sense of order and, where possible, a fragile hope. because you knew despair was the most dangerous element in any household. A significant part of your long-term duty involved the integration of new slaves, often young men and women purchased at the bustling market. Bringing a stranger into the tightly knit fabric of the villa was always a risk. You were their first and most important teacher, the one responsible for molding them into a useful member of your domestic corps. The training process was intensive and began the moment they crossed the threshold. You would assign them to a more experienced slave, an instructor who would teach them the specific routines and unspoken rules of the house. They had to learn everything: how to speak respectfully without making eye contact, how to move through the rooms without being seen or heard, and the precise methods for every task, from polishing silver to serving wine. You observed them closely during this period, assessing their aptitudes. A bright, quick learner with neat hands might be groomed for a role as a scribe or personal attendant. A stronger, less refined individual will be directed toward the gardens or stables. Your success in this training defined the household's future efficiency, turning raw, frightened individuals from foreign lands into cogs that meshed perfectly with the great machine you operated every single day. From the disciplined silence of the atrium and the guarded secrets of the storeroom, your duties next propel you into the one place in the villa where control was perpetually tested against the very elements: the culinary command center, the kitchen. Stepping through its entrance is like crossing a threshold into another world. The air, thick with heat and the scent of burning olive wood, greets you like a physical force. This is a realm of controlled chaos, a symphony of chopping, sizzling, and the hiss of steam, all conducted under your watchful gaze. Here, your role shifts from accountant disciplinarian to a strategic partner with the head cook, a collaboration that could define the family's social standing with every meal you plan together. Your first task each morning is a consultation that carries the weight of potential triumph or social disaster. You meet with the head cook, a figure of immense skill and sometimes volatile pride, to plan the day's menu. This is not a simple discussion of preferences. It is a logistical assessment based on a rapid inventory of what is available. A messenger from the family's country estate might have arrived at dawn with a delivery of fresh game, a wild boar or a hare, dictating the centerpiece of the main evening meal, the cena. Alternatively, your own eyes at the morning market would have identified the freshest catch from the nearby coast: tuna, red mullet, or sea urchins. You and the cook must then build a multi-course experience around this primary ingredient, a meal designed not just to nourish, but to dazzle and proclaim the family's wealth and sophistication to their guests. The sourcing of these ingredients is a complex web of logistics that you manage. While some staples like grain, olives, and wine come from the family's own farms, many delicacies required external procurement. You oversee the trusted slaves sent to the market with a specific budget, knowing they must navigate a world of haggling merchants and potential deception. Were the oysters truly fresh from the Lucrine Lake as claimed? Was the honey pure and unadulterated? But the most nerve-wracking part of this procurement was managing the kitchen's treasure chest, the expensive, often exotic spices. Pepper imported from the distant Malabar coast was worth its weight in silver. The plant called silphium, a now extinct herb cherished for its unique flavor, was so valuable that its juice was sold by the drop. You kept these precious commodities under lock and key, dispensing them to the cook yourself for specific recipes. A lavish pinch of pepper could elevate a simple dish to greatness, but a missing jar represented a catastrophic financial loss, a failure of your stewardship that would be nearly impossible to explain. The true test of your partnership with the kitchen staff came with the dinner party, the elaborate cena that could make or break the family's reputation. On these nights, the kitchen transforms into a battlefield of culinary ambition. You are the general, moving through the heat and frenzy, ensuring every element of the complex sequence unfolds on time. The first course, the gustatio, must feature light appetizers like eggs, olives, and shellfish to whet the appetite. The main course, the primi mensi, requires precise timing for roasting massive joints of meat or whole fish. And the final dessert, the secondi mensi, involving fruits, nuts, and sweet cakes, must be prepared without interfering with the savory dishes. Your presence is essential to maintain order, to prevent arguments between the pastry chef and the sauce maker, and to ensure that the procession of servant carriers delivers each platter to the triclinium dining room in a seamless, graceful flow, creating an illusion of effortless abundance for the reclining guests. Amid this orchestrated chaos, two constant, tangible threats loom over every activity in the kitchen. The first is fire. The open hearths and braziers, essential for roasting and boiling, are a perpetual hazard in a room often constructed with wooden beams and filled with dry kindling. A single spark, a moment of carelessness from a fatigued kitchen boy, could ignite a blaze that would not only destroy the heart of the home, but could spread to consume the entire villa. Your vigilance here is relentless. You ensure that jars of water and sand are always at hand, that flammable debris is swept away constantly, and that the fire watch slaves are sober and alert. The second threat is the insidious creep of dirt and decay. In the Mediterranean heat, food spoiled quickly, and a dirty kitchen attracted pests and bred disease. You enforce a ruthless standard of cleanliness, demanding that floors be scrubbed, utensils scoured, and scraps disposed of promptly. A case of food poisoning among the dinner guests would be a social catastrophe from which the family's reputation might never recover, a silent accusation of your failure to command this most volatile and essential domain. But your command extended far beyond the polished marble and fragrant kitchens of the main residence. To truly understand the scope of your duties, you had to regularly venture into the villa's beating economic heart, its sprawling, functional working quarters. This was an entirely separate world, a landscape of industry and grit that the family almost never visited, yet its relentless productivity was the bedrock upon which their luxurious lifestyle was built. Your daily rounds would take you past the manicured gardens and into these utilitarian spaces, where the air smelled of grain dust, hot stone, and damp earth, and where the sounds were not of polite conversation, but the rhythmic, grinding work that fueled the entire estate. Your first stop was often the mill, a place that assaulted the senses long before you entered. The deep, groaning rumble of heavy stone grinding against stone was an ever-present hum in this part of the villa. Here, the essential work of transforming raw grain into flour took place. You would step inside to a scene of controlled chaos, the air thick with a fine white powder that coated every surface. The massive millstones, the mali, were the center of this universe. They were most commonly turned by donkeys, blindfolded and plodding in an endless, monotonous circle. But in larger or more ruthless households, this back-breaking labor could be the punishment for enslaved men. Your inspection here was critical. You checked the alignment of the stones. A misalignment produced poor quality flour and damaged the expensive equipment. You watched the enslaved boys who constantly fed grain into the central hole and scooped the resulting flour into sacks, ensuring no precious resources were being spilled or wasted. This single room's output determined the quality and quantity of the bread for everyone, from the master in the triclinium to the lowest laborer in the fields. A failure here meant hunger for the entire household. Adjacent to the mill was the bakery, its heat a stark contrast to the rest of the villa. The massive wood-fired oven, built from brick and tile, was the heart of this space. Here teams of bakers, their faces flushed and sweaty, worked with a rhythm born of pure necessity. Your arrival prompted a flurry of activity and a silent hope that everything was in perfect order. You examined the consistency of the dough in its large kneading troughs, ensuring the proper ratio of flour, water, and salt had been used. You watched as skilled hands shape the loaves, some for the family's table, finer, whiter bread sometimes enriched with eggs or honey, and the heavier, denser loaves of darker bread that would feed the workforce. Your most crucial check was of the oven's temperature, a skill learned through long experience. An oven too cool produced a soggy, unappetizing loaf. An oven too hot would burn the outside while leaving the inside raw. A bad batch of bread was more than a culinary failure. It was a direct hit to morale and a glaring mark against your managerial competence. From the masculine world of the mill and bakery, your path would often lead you to the weaving rooms, typically the domain of the enslaved women of the household. This was a quieter, but no less vital, center of production. The rhythmic, almost musical click-clack of the looms provided a constant backdrop as you entered. Here, the raw wool, often shorn from the family's own flocks, was transformed into the very fabric of life. You observed the entire process, women carding the wool to soften it, others spinning it into fine thread using drop spindles, and the most skilled working the upright looms, their hands a blur as they passed the shuttle back and forth. Your inspection was twofold. You checked the quality of the cloth being produced, feeling the texture and examining the tightness of the weave. A loosely woven tunic would wear out too quickly, representing wasted labor and materials. But you were also watching the mood of the room. This was often a social space for the enslaved women, a place for quiet conversation and shared work. A harmonious atmosphere usually meant high-quality work, while tension or sullen silence could indicate disputes or discontent that you would need to address before they festered and impacted productivity. Finally, your rounds would inevitably take you down into the cool, silent depths of the storage cellars. Descending the stone steps was like entering a different realm, leaving the noise and heat of the working world behind for an atmosphere of quiet preservation. Your footsteps echoed in the vast, dimly lit spaces, your oil lamp casting long shadows across towering stacks of amphorae and grain sacks. This was the villa's financial reserve, its insurance against a poor harvest or a difficult winter. Your inspections here were methodical and deeply serious. You ran your hands over the sacks of grain and legumes, feeling for any dampness or warmth that might signal the onset of mold or infestation. A single rotten sack could contaminate an entire room. You tapped on the clay amphorae, listening for the telltale hollow sound that indicated a crack and a slow, costly leak of precious wine or olive oil. You checked the seals on jars of preserved fruits and the fish sauce garum, whose pungent aroma permeated the very stones. In these quiet, subterranean rooms, you weren't just a manager, you were an archivist of sustenance, personally verifying the security of the supplies that guaranteed the villa's survival through the coming seasons. The family upstairs enjoyed their life of leisure, completely unaware that their comfort and indeed their very survival hinged upon the relentless efficiency and your meticulous oversight of these hidden, industrious worlds. This profound level of responsibility naturally forged a relationship with the master of the house unlike any other in the villa. While other servants interacted with the dominus in specific, limited ways, your connection was constant, nuanced, and built on a foundation of absolute reliance. You were not merely his chief servant, you were his chief executive, the one person who truly understood the intricate workings of his entire domestic and financial world. Each morning after the initial household chaos was tamed, you would seek a private audience with him, a meeting that was the linchpin of the entire day. In his study, the tablinum, surrounded by the scrolls of his business and political life, you would deliver your report. This was not a simple list of chores, it was a comprehensive briefing. You informed him of the previous day's expenditures, the state of the supplies, any issues of discipline among the staff, and the readiness of the villa for any expected guests. He relied on your eyes and ears as his own, trusting you to filter the endless stream of domestic information and present him only with what was essential for him to know. This trust was the very currency of your position, earned over years of demonstrated loyalty and competence. It was a trust that extended far beyond the mundane, reaching into the most sensitive areas of his life. You were the keeper of his financial pulse, managing the cash flow that allowed his public life to function. When he needed funds for a political campaign, a charitable donation, or a personal indulgence, it was you who unlocked the arca and counted out the coins. You were also a confidant, privy to secrets he might not even share with his wife. You might be tasked with discreetly managing an allowance for a mistress, arranging for the care of an illegitimate child fostered elsewhere, or securing a loan to cover a gambling debt he wished to keep from public knowledge. This intimacy was a double-edged sword. It granted you immense informal influence and security, but it also made you dangerously complicit. His secrets became your burdens, and his potential downfall could easily become your own. The power dynamic of this relationship was incredibly complex. In a strictly legal sense, if you were still enslaved, you were his property, a piece of human inventory. Yet in practice, you wielded an authority that many freeborn Romans would envy. You spoke with his voice when you gave orders to the other slaves. A directive from you was treated as a directive from him, and your judgment in household matters was rarely overturned. This delegated power required immense finesse to wield effectively. You had to be firm enough to command respect from the staff, yet humble enough to never appear to challenge the master's ultimate authority. A successful housekeeper mastered the art of making the dominus feel perpetually in control. Even when you were the one steering the ship, you presented solutions, not problems. You offered choices that led to the outcome you knew was best, all while allowing him to believe the final decision was always his alone. Inevitably, this delicate balance was sometimes tested, and the potential for tension always simmered beneath the surface. Your entire existence was a performance of flawless efficiency, and any crack in that facade could shatter the trust you had built. If a costly piece of jewelry went missing, the first suspicious glance would fall on you, the one with the keys. If a dinner party was ruined by undercooked meat or a shortage of wine, the failure was ultimately yours, regardless of which servant was directly at fault. The master's frustration over a business setback or a political defeat could easily be taken out on the closest and safest target, you. In these moments, your years of loyal service could feel frighteningly fragile. A single significant mistake could see you demoted, punished, or even sold away from the household you had dedicated your life to managing. This constant, low-grade anxiety was the price of your position, a reminder that your authority was entirely borrowed and could be revoked in an instant, returning you from a position of power to one of powerlessness. While your partnership with the dominess was built on finance and logistics, your relationship with the mistress of the house, the domina, was woven from an entirely different fabric. Her world was the intricate social sphere of Roman matrons, a domain where reputation, hospitality, and perception were everything, and you were the indispensable architect who turned her social ambitions into reality. Your first meeting with her each day was a masterclass in diplomacy and deference. You would find her in her private quarters, often surrounded by her personal maids, the ornatresses, who were skillfully arranging her hair and jewelry. Your report to her was distinct from the one you gave her husband. Here, the focus was on the domestic stage. You informed her of the progress in the weaving rooms, the menu plans for the day, and the readiness of the reception areas for any female guests who might call. She held the social authority, but you possessed the practical knowledge to execute her vision, a dynamic that made you her most trusted advisor and the silent guardian of her private world. A primary and continuous collaboration was the management of the villa's textile production. The domina took great pride in this traditionally feminine sphere, as the quality of the cloth produced under her roof was a direct reflection of her managerial virtue. She might inspect the finished bolts of wool or linen, feeling the texture and examining the dyes, but you were the one who ensured the entire operation ran with flawless efficiency. You provided her with the raw data: how much wool had been carded, how many tunics were on the looms, and which of the enslaved women showed particular skill at weaving intricate patterns. When she decided that a new set of wall hangings was needed for the triclinium, or that finer cloth was required for her own stola, it was you who translated that desire into action, allocating materials, adjusting workloads, and ensuring her creative and social directives were met with tangible, high-quality results. Your ability to anticipate her needs and deliver exactly what she envisioned, often before she had to ask, cemented your role as her essential right hand. Nowhere was this partnership more critically tested than in the orchestration of a major banquet. For the domina, a dinner party was her grand performance, a chance to showcase her taste, her wealth, and her status among her peers. For you, it was a complex military campaign fought with linens, silver, and food. Your planning sessions with her in the days leading up to the event were intense. She would convey her vision, the theme, the guest list, the desired impression of opulence or refined intellect. You then translated that vision into 1,000 practical details. You discussed the menu not just as dishes, but as a sensory experience, suggesting that the roasted kid should be glazed with honey for a glistening appearance, or that rose petals should be strewn on the floor of the dining room for their fragrance and visual appeal. You advised her on which set of silver plate would most impress a particular guest, and you tactfully steered her away from overly ambitious menu items that might overwhelm the kitchen's capacity. During the banquet itself, while she reclined gracefully among her guests, you were the invisible conductor in the wings, ensuring that every course emerged from the kitchen in perfect sequence, that the wine flowed without interruption, and that a stray spill was cleaned instantly, preserving the illusion of seamless, effortless hospitality that was the ultimate testament to her and your skill. This deep involvement in her world naturally made you a keeper of her most intimate secrets. In the rigidly structured society of ancient Rome, the domina's life, while privileged, was often confined. You became her confidential sounding board, privy to anxieties she could share with no one else. She might confess her worries about her husband's political fortunes, her frustrations with a difficult relative, or her hopes for her children's marriages. You might be tasked with discreetly managing a financial gift to a less fortunate family member she wished to help without her husband's knowledge. In some households, this confidante role extended into even more delicate territory, such as discreetly arranging for the services of a midwife or herbalist for matters of female health, or even helping to manage the subtle complexities of a clandestine romantic attachment. Being entrusted with this knowledge was a mark of supreme trust, but it was also a dangerous burden. Knowledge of the dominant's private life was potent and, if revealed, could be socially catastrophic for her. Your discretion was therefore absolute, because her security and yours were now inextricably linked. A misstep that damaged her reputation would inevitably destroy the trust that was the foundation of your own authority and position within the villa. Beyond the meticulous management of accounts and staff, your most potent and unspoken power lay in your command of a far more elusive currency: information. You were the villa's spymaster, the central hub in a vast invisible web of whispers that connected the kitchen to the stables, the master's study to the marketplace. This network was not a formal institution, but a living, breathing ecosystem of secrets, cultivated with the same care you gave the household accounts. Your primary sources were the enslaved individuals themselves, each one a potential pair of eyes and ears. You understood that a servant cleaning a hallway overhears fragments of a private conversation between the master and a political ally. A child assigned to fan the guests at a dinner party catches a whispered comment between rival matrons. A stable hand grooming a horse learns from a visiting servant about a scandal brewing in another household. These seemingly trivial pieces of information were the threads you collected, and your skill was in weaving them into a tapestry of understanding that could protect the family from unforeseen threats. To gather these threads, you had to be a master of human psychology, offering subtle incentives for loyalty and disclosure. You couldn't simply demand information, you had to foster a culture where it flowed toward you. A servant who brought you a credible warning about a planned theft might find their own rations quietly improved or be granted a less strenuous work assignment. A personal maid who confided her mistress's anxieties might receive a small, discreet gift of perfume or a nicer piece of cloth for her own tunic. This system of rewards created a class of trusted informants who understood that their well-being was tied to your awareness of the household's undercurrents. You also had to be a discerning judge of character, able to separate malicious gossip from valuable intelligence. An accusation made out of jealousy by one servant against another had to be investigated with extreme caution, as a false claim could shatter the fragile morale of your entire workforce. Your goal was not to punish indiscriminately, but to maintain stability by identifying and neutralizing problems before they could erupt into open conflict or public scandal. This internal surveillance was your first line of defense, but your intelligence network extended far beyond the villa's walls. Every time a slave was sent to the public market, they became your agent in the field, their ears tuned to the city's relentless hum of gossip. They would return with news overheard from the stalls, talk of a ship lost at sea carrying goods a rival family had invested in, rumors of a political faction falling out of favor with the emperor, or whispers about the financial troubles of a neighbor who had recently hosted an overly extravagant party. You filtered this raw, often contradictory information, assessing its potential impact on your own family. A rival's financial distress might present an opportunity for your master to acquire a coveted piece of land at a favorable price. A shift in the political winds might dictate which guests should be invited to the next banquet and which should be politely avoided. You became the family's early warning system, your reports allowing the dominus to navigate the treacherous waters of Roman society with a crucial informational advantage. Ultimately, this role transformed you from a mere household manager into a pivotal player in the family's social and political maneuvering. The intelligence you provided allowed the master to make strategic alliances, avert potential embarrassments, and seize opportunities invisible to his peers. When a senator known for his volatile temper was planning to call upon your master, your network might warn you that he was in a foul mood after a dispute with his own builder, allowing your master to prepare a conciliatory approach. If you learned through the servant grapevine that a particular client was secretly bad-mouthing your dominus while accepting his patronage, you could advise a swift and discreet end to that relationship before it caused public damage. Your command of this web of whispers meant you held a form of power that was entirely unofficial yet profoundly real. You knew where the social bodies were buried, and that knowledge made you not just a servant, but a guardian of the family's most precious asset, its reputation. In the glittering, ruthless world of ancient Rome, that was a form of protection more valuable than any lock on any strongbox. Amidst all the practical duties and the endless calculations, one of your most profound responsibilities was one that connected the mundane world of the villa to the divine. Your day did not truly begin until you had attended to the spiritual heart of the home, the lararium. This small, beautifully decorated shrine, often a niche in the wall or a freestanding cabinet, was far more than a piece of religious furniture. It was the dwelling place of the Lares, the guardian spirits of the household and the family lineage, and the Penates, the gods who watched over the storeroom and the family's food supply. Their favor was not an abstract concept. It was considered as essential to the family's well-being as a full granary or a sturdy roof. A household with angry or neglected gods was a household living on borrowed time, vulnerable to misfortune, illness, and financial ruin. This made your role as the primary caretaker of the shrine a duty of the highest order, a daily ritual that held the entire domestic world together. Your approach to the lararium each morning was a moment of quiet solemnity. Before the clamor of the kitchen or the bustle of the atrium, you would stand before the small statues or painted figures of the Lares, often depicted as youthful dancers holding a drinking horn and a bowl. Beside them were the Penates, whose forms were sometimes more abstract. You would light a small oil lamp, its flickering flame a symbol of the family's enduring life. The offering itself was simple yet deeply symbolic. A few grains of incense would be sprinkled on a small brazier, releasing a fragrant smoke towards the heavens. Alternatively, you might offer a handful of wheat or a small libation of wine poured from a special vessel onto the altar. This was not an empty gesture. Each offering was a tangible gift, a portion of the family's own sustenance given back to the beings who made that sustenance possible. It was a renewal of a sacred contract. We honor you, and in return, you protect us. You alone ensured this contract was upheld, and the weight of that was always with you, a silent prayer on your lips that today, the gods will be pleased. The rhythm of your religious duties was not limited to these daily devotions. The Roman calendar was punctuated by family festivals, and your managerial skills were crucial in orchestrating these sacred events. One of the most significant was the Compitalia, a movable festival held in early January to honor the Lares of the Crossroads, the spirits who watched over the boundaries of the family's property. While this was a public festival in the streets within the villa, it took on a deeply personal significance. In the days leading up to it, your tasks multiplied. You oversaw the cleaning and decoration of the lararium itself, ensuring it was adorned with fresh garlands and flowers. You coordinated with the kitchen to prepare special cakes and food that would be offered to the Lares and then shared among the household slaves, a rare moment of communal feasting that reinforced the family's spiritual unity. On the day of the festival, your role shifted from manager to master of ceremonies. You would lead the household slaves in a procession to the family's boundary stones, where small, makeshift shrines were erected. Here you would preside over the offerings, often a honeyed cake or a sacrificed young pig, pleading with the Lares Compitaels to continue their vigilant watch over the estate's borders, to keep out both human thieves and malevolent spirits. The success of this festival, its orderly reverence and abundant offerings, was a direct reflection of your piety and organizational skill. A poorly conducted Compitalia was seen as an invitation for misfortune to cross the threshold, a spiritual failure for which you would be held accountable. The family's fortune, their health, and the very security of their home were believed to be directly tied to these rituals, making your sacred duties not a separate part of your job, but the foundational layer upon which all other success was built. The moment the master announced a formal banquet, the entire villa shifted its focus, and you entered the most intense and visible period of your duties. This was not merely a dinner party, it was a high-stakes performance where the family's social standing was on the line, and you were the stage manager, producer, and director all at once. The preparations began days, sometimes weeks in advance, starting with that critical meeting where the master and mistress conveyed their vision for the event. They would specify the guest list, which was itself a complex political document, determining the menu's extravagance and the evening's tone. Your mind would immediately begin translating their social ambitions into 1,000 practical realities, knowing that every choice, from the quality of the wine to the freshness of the flowers, would be scrutinized and remembered by Rome's elite. Your first and most vital collaboration was with the head cook, a partnership that could define the entire evening. The two of you would retreat to a quiet corner, your wax tablets in hand, to architect a culinary experience designed to awe. The menu for a formal cena was a multi-course journey. You began with the gustatio, the appetizer course, which had to be light and intriguing, perhaps oysters from the Lucrine Lake, eggs seasoned with a rare pepper, or a salad of fresh herbs. The main course, the primi mensi, was the centerpiece, often featuring a whole roasted suckling pig, its skin glazed with honey and dates, or an enormous sea bass garnished with a sharp fermented fish sauce. Finally, the secondi mensi, or dessert, involved fruits, nuts, sweet cakes drizzled with honey, and aged cheeses. With each dish, you and the cook debated not just flavor, but spectacle. Should the roasted pig be presented with a garland around its neck? Could the pastry chef create a dramatic centerpiece from carved dough? You were not just feeding guests, you were crafting a narrative of abundance and refinement, and every culinary decision was a line in that story. Simultaneously, your attention turned to the triclinium, the dining room that would host the event. This room's arrangement was a subtle language of power and favor. The three couches, each designed to hold 3 reclining guests, were arranged in a square around a central serving table. The placement of each guest was a delicate art you had to master. The most honored position was on the central couch, the lectus medius, and specifically the spot closest to the host. A misstep here, seating a political rival above a key ally, could create a diplomatic incident that would haunt the family for months. You consulted closely with the master on this intricate seating chart, ensuring that social hierarchies were respected and that conversational flow was encouraged between guests who might find mutual benefit in one another's company. Once the chart was set, you directed the staff in preparing the room itself, ensuring the couches were furnished with the finest cushions and covers, and that the central table was polished to a high gleam. The atmosphere of the triclinium was another canvas for your skill. You oversaw the decoration, a task that went far beyond simple aesthetics. Teams of slaves were sent to gather the freshest flowers and weave elaborate garlands of ivy, violets, and roses. These weren't just for the tables. Guests would often wear them on their heads. You ensured the room was perfumed with saffron or cinnamon-infused water sprinkled on the floors, and that the lighting from the numerous oil lamps was perfectly calibrated, bright enough to showcase the silver plate and the vibrant food, but soft enough to create an intimate, luxurious ambience. Every sensory detail, from the visual splendor to the fragrant air, was meticulously curated by you to envelop the guests in an experience of unparalleled wealth and taste. As the hour of the banquet approached, your role shifted from planner to field commander. The service staff, a hand-picked team of the most graceful and discreet enslaved youths, received their final briefing from you. You drilled them on the sequence of courses, the proper method for pouring wine without dripping, and the silent language of hand signals they would use to communicate across the room without disturbing the guests. You stressed the importance of invisibility. Their success was measured by their ability to anticipate a need and fulfill it without ever being noticed. A single dropped platter, a spilled cup of wine, or a long pause between courses would shatter the carefully constructed illusion of effortless hospitality and draw critical attention to the machinery of the household, your machinery. When the first guests finally arrived, you took up your strategic position, a vantage point that allowed you to observe the entire triclinium and the passage to the kitchen. The evening unfolded as a symphony, and you were its conductor, your eyes constantly moving, your mind processing a flood of information. You watched the wine servers, ensuring they mixed the wine with water to the precise ratio preferred by the master, and that they moved with a quiet efficiency that kept every cup full. Your ears were tuned to the kitchen, listening for the telltale sounds of the next course being plated, ready to give a subtle nod to the lead server to begin their procession. You monitored the mood of the table, watching for a guest whose cup was empty or whose posture suggested they needed a different delicacy. Your greatest challenge was maintaining the seamless flow, the magical continuity where food and wine appeared as if by divine providence, with no visible effort or delay, allowing the family to bask in the admiration of their peers, their status confirmed by the flawless execution of an evening that represented the pinnacle of your professional life. Yet amidst all this responsibility and subtle influence, there existed a stark and brutal dimension to your authority that could never be ignored, the power to discipline and punish. This was the dark underbelly of your command, the grim reality that underpinned the villa's serene order. Your duty to maintain absolute control came with a set of tools not made of polished wood or gleaming metal, but of leather and iron, instruments designed to inflict pain and instill fear. The most common of these was the whip, the flagrum, a vicious multi-thonged lash often tipped with small pieces of bone or metal. A single strike could tear open skin, and its use was a public, terrifying spectacle meant to serve as a warning to every witness. For less severe, yet still necessary, corrections you might employ the ferula, a sturdy rod or cane used to deliver sharp, stinging blows to the hands or back. These were not abstract concepts, they were tangible objects you had to be prepared to call for, their very presence a constant reminder of the violent coercion that supported the entire social structure. Beyond these corporal punishments lay even more severe measures for those who committed grave offenses like theft, repeated insolence, or attempting to flee. Heavy iron shackles could be fastened to a slave's ankles, not only restricting their movement, but branding them with a visible mark of disgrace that humiliated them in front of their peers. The ultimate threat, however, the one that truly cast a long shadow over the entire workforce, was the ergastulum. This was not merely a cell, it was an underground prison, a dungeon often described as a pit where unruly slaves were kept in perpetual darkness and chained to their workstations. Condemnation to the ergastulum was a fate arguably worse than death, a permanent removal from the community, sunlight, and any semblance of hope, reserved for those considered irredeemable or dangerously rebellious. Merely mentioning its existence was often enough to quell dissent, a psychological weapon as potent as any physical tool. Wielding this power placed you on a perilous ethical tightrope, a daily balancing act between the demands of your master and the fragile morale of the people you managed. The Roman worldview saw stern discipline not as cruelty, but as a necessary and virtuous component of proper household management. A master expected his chief steward to be firm and unyielding. To be perceived as lenient or soft was itself a mark of failure, a sign that you were too weak to command. A single act of unchecked disobedience could be seen as the first thread pulled from a tapestry, potentially unraveling the entire household's hierarchy and respect for authority. You were constantly watched, your resolve tested by small acts of defiance. Allowing a minor infraction to pass without comment might be interpreted as vulnerability, encouraging others to push the boundaries further, risking a slide into chaos. Yet the opposite extreme held an even greater danger. Being excessively harsh, too quick with the lash, or too severe in your judgments, risked igniting the very fire you sought to extinguish. You lived and worked in close quarters with the people you disciplined. You knew their names, their families, their small hopes, and their deep-seated resentments. A punishment perceived as unjust or disproportionately brutal could transform sullen compliance into smoldering hatred. That hatred could fester and spread, leading to a coordinated conspiracy of theft, the deliberate sabotage of valuable property, or in the most extreme and terrifying scenarios, open rebellion or even poison in the master's cup. Your own safety was tied to the general contentment of the household. A staff driven by terror and despair was a powder keg, and you were the one living directly on top of it. Every decision to punish was therefore a calculated risk, a judgment call, weighing the immediate need for order against the long-term poison of bitterness. This left you carrying a heavy, invisible burden that no account ledger could ever capture. After ordering a whipping or confining someone to chains, you had to return to the daily routine of management, facing the silent accusations in the eyes of the other slaves. You had to maintain an outward appearance of unwavering resolve, a mask of impersonal authority, while internally grappling with the human cost of that authority. The cries of pain, the flinching at your approach, the broken spirit of a once proud worker, these were the ghosts that haunted your private moments. In the quiet of the evening, after the household was asleep, you might reflect on the brutal necessity of your actions, justifying them through the lens of Roman duty while knowing the profound human toll they exacted. This aspect of the job was a solitary weight, a moral compromise woven into the very fabric of your position, reminding you that the smooth operation of a Roman villa was built not just on efficiency and trust, but on a foundation of sanctioned violence and the constant, grim management of fear. After the final guest has departed and the last lamp has been extinguished, when the sounds of the bustling villa finally fade into the deep silence of night, You retreat to the one space in the entire complex that is truly your own, your cella. This small room, often tucked away in a quiet corridor close to the master's quarters, is far more than just a place to sleep. It is a powerful symbol of your unique status, a tangible reward for your loyalty and competence. Unlike the vast majority of the enslaved workforce who sleep in crowded, noisy dormitories, you are granted the profound luxury of privacy. Your room is sparsely furnished, likely containing little more than a simple cot, a small chest for your personal belongings, and perhaps a tiny shelf for a precious oil lamp. But within these four walls, you can finally release the mask of constant authority and vigilance. Here you are not the stern manager, the shrewd accountant, or the household spy. You are simply yourself with your own thoughts, your own weariness, and your own private hopes. This quiet solitude is the greatest privilege of your position, a small island of peace in the relentless sea of your responsibilities. Within this private space, you might nurture the most fragile and dangerous commodity in a slave's life, love. Romantic relationships between enslaved people were a complex and often heartbreaking reality. A bond might form with another trusted servant within the villa, perhaps a scribe who shares your appreciation for quiet order, or a personal attendant who understands the unique pressures of working directly with the family. These relationships provided essential emotional shelter, a shared understanding, and a source of comfort in a world that otherwise offered very little. They were conducted in stolen moments, a whispered conversation in a deserted hallway, a secret touch while passing in the atrium, or the rare, cherished evening where you could sit together in the quiet of your cella. But this love existed under a perpetual shadow. It had no legal recognition. You could not marry in the way Roman citizens did. Any union was informal, a matter of mutual affection and the master's tacit permission, which could be withdrawn at any moment. The deepest connection in your life was in the eyes of the law, entirely invisible. This shadow looms largest when it comes to children. If a child was born from such a relationship, it was an event fraught with conflicting emotions, profound personal joy immediately tempered by the harsh truth of your powerlessness. That newborn, the embodiment of your love, was not your own. Under Roman law, the child was the property of your master, just as you were. You had no parental rights. You could not decide the child's name, their education, or their future. The master held the absolute power of life and destiny over your son or daughter. He might choose to allow the child to remain with you, to be raised within the household, perhaps even trained for a skilled role. This was the best possible outcome, a fragile family unit existing on borrowed time and the master's goodwill. But he could just as easily decide to sell the child away, to transfer them to another of his properties, or to give them as a gift to a political ally. The heartbreak of such a separation was a constant, nagging fear for any enslaved parent, a loss you were powerless to prevent, a living piece of your soul treated as a simple asset on a ledger. Because of this inherent instability, your most consistent and defining family often became the household itself. This was a complicated, often fraught form of kinship. The villa was your entire world, and the people within it, the master, the mistress, and the dozens of other enslaved individuals, were the only relatives you had on a daily basis. This created a peculiar dual reality. You might feel a genuine, decades-deep loyalty to the dominus, the man who trusted you with his fortune and his secrets. You might share inside jokes with the cook you've worked beside for 20 years, or feel a protective, almost parental affection for a young servant you yourself trained. Yet in an instant, this same family could turn on you. The master you faithfully served could, in a fit of rage over a minor mistake, order you whipped. The cook who was your friend could, under pressure, lie about you to save himself. The household was a network of alliances and rivalries, of genuine affection and profound self-interest, all coexisting under one roof. Your survival depended on navigating these shifting currents, on understanding that the bonds you formed were both real and perpetually fragile. Consequently, the emotional landscape of your life was a masterclass in compartmentalization. You learned to hold love and fear in your heart simultaneously. You could cherish the quiet evenings in your cello with your partner, while knowing that a single word of displeasure from the mistress could see one of you sold to a distant province. You could feel pride in watching a child you helped raise grow into a skilled artisan, while living with the dread that they might one day be given away as a wedding present. This constant balancing act between personal connection and legal powerlessness defined your private existence. The villa housekeeper, for all their authority and responsibility, inhabited a world of profound emotional contradictions, where the deepest human bonds were the very things that made you most vulnerable, and where your only true family was the same intricate, demanding institution that owned you. As the last echoes of the banquet fade and the final oil lamp is extinguished in the master's quarters, your most critical shift is just beginning. The transition from day to night transforms the villa from a place of bustling activity into a vast, silent fortress, its shadows concealing potential threats that your daytime vigilance cannot reach. Your first and most crucial duty in this nocturnal ritual is the inspection and final securing of the villa's perimeter. You move methodically from the main gate, a heavy iron-reinforced structure, to every secondary entrance and postern door, testing each lock and bar yourself. The massive wooden beam, the obex that bars the main gate, is a weight you feel in your muscles as you slide it into its heavy iron brackets, a satisfying thud that signals the villa is now sealed off from the outside world. Every shuttered window on the ground floor receives a similar check, your hands confirming what your eyes can barely see in the dim light of your lantern. This physical act of closing up the villa is a deeply symbolic one. You are drawing a protective circle around the entire household, and the integrity of that circle is your personal responsibility. With the villa locked down, your attention turns to mobilizing its nocturnal guardians, the vigiles. This small, hand-picked team of trusted slaves is your eyes and ears through the long, dark hours. Their selection was one of your most important long-term decisions. You needed individuals who were not only strong and alert, but also possessed an unshakable loyalty, as they were the only ones armed with anything more than kitchen tools, typically carrying heavy staves or cudgels. Your evening muster with them is a brief, sober affair. You review their assigned patrol routes, which are designed to ensure no corner of the vast property, from the silent, echoing atrium to the dark, cavernous storage cellars, is left unobserved for long. You stress the challenges of the night watch, the numbing cold, the profound silence that can play tricks on the mind, and the ever-present temptation of sleep. A sleeping watchman is worse than no watchman at all, for he provides a false sense of security, and the punishment for such a failure would be severe, falling on both the individual and on you for your poor judgment in choosing him. The greatest threat these men face is not always a human intruder, but the sheer soul-crushing monotony of their task. A watchman's round is a lonely, repetitive journey through identical, shadowy corridors, with nothing but the sound of his own footsteps and the occasional scuttle of a mouse for company. To combat this, you implemented a system of accountability that broke the silence of the night. Each watchman carried a small wooden token, and at key points along his route, a specific column in the Paris-style garden, a marked spot near the bakery, he would deposit his token into a locked box. At the end of the night, you would personally collect these boxes. A missing token was immediate, irrefutable proof that a patrol had been skipped, a system that relied on simple mechanics to ensure complex discipline. Furthermore, you occasionally made unscheduled, silent rounds of your own, your soft-soled shoes making no sound on the mosaic floors. Your sudden, ghost-like appearance at the far end of a colonnade was a powerful deterrent against complacency, a constant reminder that even in the deepest night, the housekeeper's authority was awake and watching. Despite these precautions, the night held two primal fears that could shatter the villa's peace in an instant: the threat of fire and the specter of intrusion. Your protocols for each were drilled into every member of the vigiles. For fire, the watchword was speed and noise. The moment a guard saw the telltale flicker of unauthorized flame or smelled smoke, his duty was not to fight it alone, but to raise the alarm. He would shout at the top of his lungs and ring a loud handheld bell, a jarring sound designed to pierce the deepest sleep. This alarm was the signal for a prearranged emergency response. Slaves stationed near the kitchen and garden wells would form a bucket brigade, while others were tasked with rushing to specific rooms to rescue valuable items: the strongbox, the master's important documents, the family's finest silver. Your role was to direct this chaotic response, to be the calm center of the storm, ensuring the family was evacuated safely while salvaging as much of the household's wealth as possible. A fire in the night was your ultimate nightmare, a test of your planning and leadership under the most extreme pressure. The procedure for an intruder was the opposite. It demanded silence and stealth. If a watchman heard a suspicious sound, the scrape of a tool on a window grate, the faint creak of a floorboard where no one should be, he was not to confront the threat alone. Instead, he was to retreat silently and summon at least 2 other guards. Together, armed and prepared, they would move to corner and apprehend the trespasser. The goal was capture, not immediate bloodshed, as a living intruder could be questioned, potentially revealing if he was acting alone or as part of a larger conspiracy. On the rare, terrifying occasion when this happened, the intruder would be bound and held in a secure storage room until first light, when you would awaken the master to deliver the news and determine the fate of the captured man. These moments, standing in the dark with a bound stranger and your own pounding heart, were stark reminders that the walls of the villa were a fragile barrier against the dangers of the world outside, and that your nightly preparations were not just procedure, but a vital shield for every soul, free and enslaved, who slept within. Beyond the nightly vigil for intruders and fire, your authority extended to a far more intimate and unpredictable form of crisis, the sudden failure of health within the villa's walls. In a world without hospitals or emergency services, you became the household's first and often only resort in a medical emergency. Your training was not from a formal school of medicine, but a patchwork of inherited folk wisdom, observations of the local midwives, and the practical knowledge passed down from one housekeeper to the next. You were expected to be a walking pharmacopoeia, your mind a mental ledger not just of accounts, but of symptoms and cures, your storerooms containing not just grain and oil, but carefully labeled jars of dried herbs, prepared salves, and rolls of clean linen for bandages. A servant's fever, the cook's burned hand, or a child's nasty fall, all of it landed at your feet first, and your response could mean the difference between a swift recovery and a tragic decline. Your basic medical kit was assembled from the villa's own gardens and the surrounding countryside. For a deep cut from a kitchen knife or a farming tool, you would first cleanse the wound with vinegar or wine, a painful but effective way to prevent corruption of the flesh. Then you would apply a poultice made from honey, prized for its natural ability to draw out infection and soothe inflammation, often mixed with crushed yarrow leaves to help staunch the bleeding. For fevers, you might prepare a tea from willow bark, a bitter brew that we now know contains a precursor to aspirin, or you would use cool cloths and sponging to bring down a dangerously high temperature. A persistent cough would be treated with a syrup of honey and thyme, while digestive troubles might call for an infusion of mint or fennel seeds. For a broken bone, your role was one of grim practicality. You would stabilize the limb with wooden splints and tight bandages, relying on the body's own healing power, while you managed the patient's pain with poppy tea, a potent and risky sedative you dispensed with extreme caution. Your success relied on a combination of observed results and a steadfast belief in the properties of these natural remedies, a practice that blended early science with deep-seated tradition. The true weight of your role, however, was felt not in treating a common ailment, but in making the critical decision about when your own skills were insufficient. When a member of the master's own family fell seriously ill, the entire dynamic of the household shifted. A high fever in the domina or a severe injury to the master's son placed you under an intense spotlight. Your first duty was to inform the dominus, a conversation fraught with anxiety. You had to present the facts clearly without inciting panic, demonstrating that you had the situation under control while also acknowledging the potential gravity of the situation. The decision to call for an outside physician was a major one with significant financial and social implications. A Greek doctor, often seen as the most learned, was a tremendously expensive luxury. His arrival was an event, and his diagnosis could either confirm your initial treatment, bolstering your reputation, or completely overturn it, making you look incompetent. Bringing a physician into the home was an exercise in managed tension. You were the liaison, the one who had to present the physician with a clear history of the illness while also subtly asserting your own authority within the household. You watched as he conducted his examination, perhaps checking the patient's pulse or the color of their urine, methods that were mysterious to you. He might prescribe a complex regimen involving rare ingredients you had to procure immediately, or procedures like bloodletting that you would never dare to attempt yourself. Your job was to facilitate his treatment while also protecting the family's privacy. A noble family's vulnerabilities were not for public gossip, and a talkative physician could damage their standing. The entire process was a high-stakes gamble, A successful recovery with the doctor's help reinforced the family's status and your own good judgment in summoning him. A failure, however, could see you bearing the blame, accused of calling the doctor too late or, conversely, of wasting a vast sum of money on a charlatan who could not save a life. Yet this tense, expensive drama in the main house was often a stark contrast to the quiet, grinding terror that could emerge from the crowded servants' quarters. While the family lived in spacious, airy rooms, the enslaved workforce slept in cramped, often poorly ventilated dormitories, creating a perfect environment for disease to spread with terrifying speed. The word plague could refer to any fast-moving, contagious sickness, from a severe influenza to dysentery or even something as deadly as smallpox. When the first cough was heard or the first slave collapsed with fever and chills, a specific cold dread would settle in your stomach. Your first action was one of brutal triage. The afflicted were immediately isolated if space allowed, moved to a makeshift infirmary in a storeroom or shed to try and contain the outbreak. You would then dose the entire workforce with what preventative remedies you had, like garlic or strengthening broths, a desperate attempt to build resilience in those still healthy. Managing a plague in the slave quarters was a logistical and ethical nightmare. The villa's work still had to continue, but your primary workforce was being decimated. You had to reassign duties constantly, pushing the healthy to their limits, which in turn made them more susceptible to the illness. You moved through the infirmary space, your face covered with a cloth, distributing water, herbal teas, and what little comfort you could offer, all while knowing that every person lying there represented a potential economic loss for the master and a human tragedy you were powerless to stop. The sounds of suffering, the constant coughing, the moans of pain, the eventual silence from a corner were a haunting counterpoint to the enforced order of the rest of the villa. In these moments, your role as a medic was utterly overwhelmed by your role as a manager of human capital. You were forced to make cold calculations about food and care for people who might not survive, all while presenting a calm face to the master, assuring him that the situation was contained, even as you privately feared the outbreak would jump to the family itself, a catastrophe that would undoubtedly be laid at your door. This was the ultimate medical crisis, a scenario where your folk remedies and poultices felt hopelessly inadequate, and you were left to witness the grim, impartial power of nature as it moved through the most vulnerable members of your world. Considering the sheer scale of the villa's operations, the one tool that truly defined your authority was not the ring of keys or the steward's staff, but the humble, wax-coated wooden tablet you carried everywhere. This was your ledger, the written memory of the household, and your mastery of it was what separated a simple manager from a chief executive. Your day was punctuated by the constant scratch of your stylus, etching numbers and notes into the soft wax, creating a permanent record of every single transaction that sustained the vast economic engine of the estate. This was not mere bookkeeping, it was the art of translating the entire chaotic life of the villa, the harvests, the meals, the wages, the repairs, into neat, orderly columns of figures that the master could understand and trust. Your numeracy, your ability to hold this complex web of debits and credits in your mind, was a form of power just as potent as any physical key you carried. The process of recording was relentless and began at sunrise. A trusted slave from the farm would arrive with a report from the country estate. 20 amphorae of new olive oil had been pressed and were now stored in the main cellar. You would note this down not as a simple inventory addition, but as a potential future income. That oil was an asset, and you were already calculating how much would be needed for the household's own consumption over the next 6 months, and how many amphorae could be sold for pure profit at the market. Next, the cook would approach, needing funds to purchase a specific spice for the evening's banquet. You would carefully weigh out the required bronze coins from the strongbox, and your stylist would immediately record the expenditure. To Marcus the cook, for pepper, 5 sesterces. This level of detail was essential. A vague entry like kitchen supplies was useless. The master needed to see exactly where his money was flowing, and you were his transparent window into those currents. Your financial oversight extended to the most personal aspects of life within the villa. When a new tunic was needed for a slave who had outgrown his old one, you didn't just hand out cloth. You recorded the cost of the wool, the labor hours spent by the women in the weaving room, and even the value of the dye used. This allowed the master to see the total cost of maintaining his human property. Similarly, when a slave fell ill and you had to pay for an outside physician, that expense was meticulously logged. These records were cold, numerical snapshots of human necessity, but they were vital for the master to assess the overall financial health of his domain. You were constantly balancing these microtransactions, the daily drip of expenses, against the larger, seasonal inflows of income from rents, farm surpluses, and other business ventures. Your ledger was a living document, its wax surface constantly being smoothed and rewritten, a testament to the unending flow of resources that was your primary responsibility to manage. This daily financial management was merely the foundation for one of your most critical duties, budgeting for large-scale projects. The master might decide to add a new bath suite to the villa, a project that would span months and consume a staggering amount of resources. It fell to you to translate his architectural ambition into a concrete financial plan. You would first create a preliminary budget, an estimate of the total cost. This involved calculating the price of thousands of bricks, the wages for a team of specialized outside builders and masseuses, the cost of transporting marble from a distant quarry, and the ongoing expense of feeding the extra laborers. You had to anticipate everything, from the lead pipes for the plumbing to the special waterproof cement for the hypo-cost system. Presenting this initial budget to the dominus was a delicate negotiation. You had to be realistic about costs without appearing to dismiss his vision or question his ambition. Once the project was approved, your role shifted to that of a ruthless comptroller, ensuring the actual spending did not wildly exceed the plan. The foreman of the building crew would come to you weekly for his wages, presenting a tally of the days worked by each laborer. You checked these figures against your own observations. Had the bricklayer Quintus really worked all 7 days, or had you seen him idling for one of them? You personally verified every delivery of materials, counting sacks of lime and stacks of timber against the merchant's invoice before authorizing payment. Any discrepancy, any attempt at overcharging was caught by your vigilant eye and recorded in your ledger. This tight control was essential. A large construction project was a notorious sinkhole for a family's wealth, and without your meticulous oversight, costs could easily spiral into financial disaster. Your ability to keep the project on budget was a direct measure of your value, proving that you could not only manage the daily economy, but also steer the household through major capital investments without running it aground. All of this relentless recording and budgeting culminated in the moment that every housekeeper both prepared for and dreaded, the formal account audit with the dominus. This was typically a monthly ritual, a time when you laid your work bare for his ultimate scrutiny. You would enter his tablinum, your wooden tablet stacked neatly in your arms, your mind rehearsing the explanations for every significant entry. The process was methodical and could take hours. He would pore over the figures, his finger tracing the lines of your script while you stood by, ready to provide context for any query. Why was the expenditure on wine so high this month? You would explain the cost of the special vintage purchased for his daughter's wedding festivities. Why was the income from the wool clip lower than last year? You would detail the unexpected spring rains that had affected the quality of the fleece. This audit was the ultimate test of your loyalty and competence, a scene of high-stakes professional theater. The master was not just looking for mathematical accuracy, he was searching for the story the numbers told about your stewardship. A perfectly balanced ledger with clear, justified entries built trust and reinforced your indispensable role, but a single unexplained discrepancy, a missing sum of money, or a pattern of spending that seemed reckless could shatter that trust in an instant. The weight of those wax tablets in that room was immense, for they contained not just numbers, but the proof of your integrity. A successful audit meant another month of secured authority and the master's deepened confidence. A failed one could mean demotion, punishment, or the unthinkable, being replaced by someone else who could be trusted with the fragile, vital economy of the Roman villa. These occasional journeys beyond the villa walls were more than simple errands. They were your fleeting taste of the world outside your managed domain, a world pulsating with a chaotic energy entirely absent from the villa's ordered silence. The master's command to visit the forum would set in motion a carefully choreographed preparation. You wouldn't simply walk out the door. First, you gathered your most trusted assistant, often a strong, alert slave to act as both porter and bodyguard, and you went to the strongbox. Counting out the specific sum of coins for the day's purchases was a ritual in itself, the clink of bronze and silver a reminder of the immense trust being placed in you. You carried this money in a leather pouch secured tightly to your belt, its weight a constant, sobering reminder of your responsibility. Your appearance mattered deeply. As the chief steward of a prominent household, you were a walking advertisement for your master's wealth and prestige. You wore your best tunic, clean and neatly pressed, a visible signal that you were not a common servant but a person of significant authority, an extension of the dominus himself the moment you stepped into the public eye. The journey to the forum was a sensory awakening. Leaving behind the hushed, perfumed air of the villa, you were immediately struck by the vibrant assault of the city. The narrow streets echoed with the cacophony of street vendors hawking their wares, the clatter of cartwheels on stone paving, and the dense press of humanity from every stratum of Roman society. You moved through this throng, your senses absorbing everything: the sharp smell of curing leather from a workshop, the rich aroma of baking bread from a public bakery, the pungent odor of the nearby fish market. This was a world of raw, unfiltered life, a stark contrast to the pristine, controlled environment you were responsible for maintaining. Your path might take you past the grand public baths, their imposing facades hinting at the leisure you never had time for, or past a school where you could hear the recitation of Virgil, a language of high culture that existed in a parallel universe to your own practical concerns. Every step reinforced the separation between your inner world of duty and the sprawling, messy reality of the empire outside your master's gates. Entering the forum itself was like stepping onto the world stage. This was not a single market but a sprawling district of commerce and gossip, a labyrinth of specialized stalls and shouting merchants. Your first stop was often the spice merchant, his stall a treasure trove of rare aromas. Here, small sacks of precious peppercorns from India, cinnamon from Sri Lanka, and cloves from the distant Moluccas were displayed like jewels. The haggling here was a high-stakes art form. You couldn't appear too eager or the price would skyrocket. You had to project an air of experienced nonchalance, questioning the quality, pointing out slight discolorations, and casually mentioning a rival merchant who offered a better price. Securing a fair deal on a pound of pepper was a direct contribution to the family's coffers, and your skill at negotiation was a point of personal and professional pride. A successful purchase here meant the master's table would be seasoned with the flavors of the empire, a tangible symbol of his reach and your procurement prowess. From the spice merchant, your route would take you to the fish market, a place of frantic activity and sharp-eyed dealers. The best fish, the fat red mullets and the prized sea bass, were sold in a rapid-fire morning auction. You had to arrive early, your trained eye assessing the glint in a fish's eye and the red hue of its gills to judge its freshness. A late arrival meant being left with inferior stock, a failure that could ruin a planned dinner party. Next, you might seek out a potter, needing to replace a cracked amphora for the olive oil stores, or a metal worker, commissioning a new set of cooking knives for the kitchen. Each transaction was a small exercise in diplomacy and economics. You represented a wealthy patron, and every merchant knew that securing your regular business could be highly lucrative. They would flatter you, offer you small samples of their goods, and try to glean information about the family's future needs, treating you with a respect that was both genuine and strategically calculated. But your ears were as important as your coin purse on these outings. The forum was the central nervous system of the city's gossip, a place where news and rumors swirled like dust in the air. As you moved from stall to stall, you listened. You overheard snippets of conversation between a group of merchants complaining about a ship lost at sea, a ship that might have been carrying goods for one of your master's political rivals. You caught whispers from a group of matrons discussing a scandal in another noble household, information you would later relay to your domina to help her navigate the treacherous waters of high society. A chance remark from a butcher about rising grain prices due to unrest in a distant province was not just small talk, it was strategic intelligence. You stored all these fragments away, piecing them together to form a picture of the political and economic climate that could affect your own family. In this way, you were not just a purchaser of goods, but a gatherer of intelligence, your forays into the market providing the family with a crucial window onto the world that they, in their rarefied existence, rarely saw firsthand. This taste of relative autonomy, however, was always shadowed by the constraints of your position. While you had more freedom of movement than any other slave in the villa, you were never truly free. The assistant accompanying you was also a subtle minder, a witness to your actions and interactions. The money you carried was meticulously accounted for, and you were expected to return with both the goods and a precise reckoning of every sester spent. The respect you were shown in the forum was conditional, granted not to you as an individual, but to the powerful name you represented. The moment you passed back through the villa's main gate, the bustling chaos of the outside world was replaced once more by the familiar weight of responsibility. You returned to the silent scrutiny of the atrium, the waiting accounts, and the endless needs of the household, the brief echo of freedom fading into the enduring reality of your complex, confining, and utterly essential role. But your command of the villa's internal economy was intrinsically tied to a much larger, rhythmic cycle that governed life itself, the relentless turn of the agricultural seasons. While you managed the bustling human world within the walls, your authority stretched invisibly to the family's nearby farms, the latifundia, whose bounty was the literal lifeblood of the entire household. This connection transformed you from a mere household manager into a logistical mastermind, your mind constantly calibrated to the sun, the rain, and the soil. Your planning began not with the day's menu, but with the year's harvest, a long-term strategy that ensured the villa's granaries, cellars, and oil jars were perpetually full, creating a buffer against famine and a foundation for the family's wealth. The first signs of this cycle reached you through messengers, trusted slaves from the country estate who would arrive at your door, their news dictating your immediate priorities. In the late summer, the word would come, the grapes were ready. This was the signal for one of the most intense and critical periods of your year. The vendimia, the grape harvest, was a race against time. You would coordinate the arrival of cart after creaking wooden cart, each one laden with overflowing baskets of dark fruit, their sweet, fermenting scent filling the air around the villa's service entrance. Your role was to oversee the immediate processing. The grapes couldn't wait, they had to be crushed, their juice transferred to massive fermentation jars, the dolia, which were partially buried in the ground to maintain a stable temperature. You didn't just count the amphorae, you tasted the must, the fresh grape juice with the cellar master, assessing its potential. A good harvest meant a vintage that could be aged for years, becoming a valuable asset for both the family's table and for lucrative trade. A poor one meant a thin, sour wine and a significant financial setback. Almost on the heels of the vintage came the autumn olive harvest, an operation that required a different kind of precision. The arrival of the olives, first green and then shifting to a dark purple-black, signaled the need for a different kind of urgency. Olives for eating were cured in brine, a process you supervised in the kitchens. But the vast majority were destined for the press to yield the liquid gold that was olive oil. This substance was the cornerstone of Roman life. It lit the lamps, cleaned the skin, dressed the salads, and cooked the food. Its importance cannot be overstated. As the heavy sacks of olives were unloaded, you directed their transfer to the villa's own press, if it had one, or coordinated with a communal press in the neighborhood. You watched as the crushed olive paste was piled onto mats and pressed, the precious green gold oil trickling out. Your most critical job was securing this yield. You oversaw its transfer into specially designed amphorae, checking that their seals were airtight to prevent the oil from turning rancid. Every jar represented light, nourishment, and wealth, and your meticulous inventory of them was a direct measure of the household's security for the year ahead. Then came the grain, the most fundamental harvest of all. The arrival of the wheat and barley was a moment of profound relief and intensified labor. The grain ships from Egypt or the carts from the local fields brought with them the guarantee of bread, the staple of life for every single person under your roof. Your management of this resource was a masterclass in long-term planning. The grain couldn't simply be dumped into a storeroom. It had to be perfectly dry before storage to prevent the growth of deadly molds or infestation by weevils. You directed the slaves as they spread the golden sheaves on large tarpaulins in the sun, turning them regularly. Once dry, the grain was threshed to separate the kernels from the chaff, and then winnowed, tossed into the air so the breeze could carry the lighter husks away. The sound of this work, the rhythmic beat of the flails and the constant rustle, was the sound of survival itself. Your final and perhaps most vital duty was the strategic storage of all these seasonal riches. The subterranean cellars you inspected daily became the vaults for this annual treasure. Here your foresight was tested. You had to calculate with remarkable accuracy how much grain, oil, and wine the household would consume before the next harvest. This was not guesswork, it was a science based on the number of mouths to feed, the frequency of lavish banquets, and the need for reserves in case of a poor harvest next year. The granaries had to be kept cool, dry, and meticulously sealed against rats and insects. The amphorae of oil and wine were stacked in careful rows, their contents noted on their clay surfaces in painted script. You knew that a crack in a single jar could mean the loss of 50 liters of wine, a small fortune. This stored abundance was your greatest achievement. It meant the family could not only live in comfort through the lean winter months, but also engage in the social and political rituals that defined their status. A gift of a fine aged wine to a patron, a distribution of grain to loyal clients during a shortage. These acts of generosity and power were only possible because of your flawless management of the seasonal cycle, a silent testament to the planning that turned the fruits of the earth into the currency of influence in the heart of the city. Despite the immense authority you wielded and the intricate web of trust you had spun, your entire existence rested on a foundation of brittle glass, ready to shatter with a single misstep. The shadow of failure was a constant companion, a chilling presence that tempered every success and turned every triumph into a temporary reprieve. You navigated a world where perfection was the baseline expectation, and anything less was a personal indictment of your competence and loyalty. This was the grim reality of your position. The higher you climbed within the household hierarchy, the more catastrophic the potential fall. A life defined by meticulous control was perpetually one careless moment away from total ruin, and the consequences were as severe as they were swift. Consider the social minefield of a spoiled banquet, an event you had poured weeks of preparation into. Imagine the scene. The triclinium is filled with the city's most influential guests, the air fragrant with perfumes and the promise of a legendary evening. Then the main course arrives. The roasted boar, which should have been succulent and aromatic, carries the faint, unmistakable scent of spoilage. A hushed, awkward silence falls over the couches. The master's face, moments before beaming with pride, darkens with a flush of humiliation. The guests, too polite to comment openly, exchange knowing glances and push the meat around their plates. The failure is absolute and public. In that moment, the elaborate fiction of your flawless management evaporates. The blame would not fall on the tired kitchen boy who might have stored the meat improperly, nor on the cook who was working with inferior ingredients. The ultimate responsibility was yours. You were the architect of the event, and its collapse was your architectural failure. The master's disgrace in front of his peers would demand a swift and visible scapegoat, and you, the chief steward, were the most logical target for his rage. Theft of a valuable object was another catastrophe that could end your career and your life as you knew it. Picture the master calling for his favorite carved gemstone, an heirloom passed down for generations, only for you to open the strongbox and find an empty space where it should have been. Your blood would run cold. That single missing item could trigger an inquisition within the household. As the person with the keys, you were the prime suspect. Even if you were miraculously proven innocent, the very occurrence of the theft was a glaring sign of your failed oversight. It proved your network of informants had holes, your security measures were inadequate, and your control over the staff was incomplete. The master's trust, painstakingly built over decades, would evaporate in an instant. He would never look at you the same way again, and your authority over the other slaves would crumble, as they would see you as either a thief or an incompetent fool who could no longer protect them from collective punishment. The most terrifying specter of all, however, was the threat of organized rebellion. This was not a mere failure of management, it was the complete and utter inversion of the entire social order you were tasked with upholding. The fear of a coordinated uprising by the enslaved workforce was a primal anxiety for every Roman master, and by extension for you. Your life depended on maintaining a delicate balance of discipline and incentive to keep the peace. If that balance tipped too far toward despair, if punishments became too brutal, rations too meager, or hopes for manumission extinguished, the unthinkable could happen. A conspiracy could form in the dead of night, a plot to poison the family's well, set fire to the villa, or worse, to slit the throats of the masters as they slept. As the chief enforcer of the master's will, you would be a primary target in such a revolt. Your fate in those first chaotic, violent moments would be grim. And even if the rebellion were crushed by urban guards, the subsequent investigation would inevitably conclude that the housekeeper, the manager of morale, had failed in his most fundamental duty, to maintain control. Your punishment for such a systemic failure would be unimaginably severe. The personal consequences of these failures were brutally tangible and designed to serve as a stark warning to your replacement. A public flogging was a common starting point, a ritual of pain and humiliation meant to strip you of your authority and reassert the master's absolute power. Stripped of your tunic in the atrium, the same space where you once commanded respect, the lash would tear into your back, each strike erasing a year of earned trust. But physical pain was often the lesser evil. Demotion was a more psychological torment. You could be stripped of your ring of keys, your private cella, and your fine tunic, and reassigned to the grinding mill or the filthy stables, forced to take orders from the very slaves you once commanded. The daily shame of this fall from grace, of being mocked and despised by those who once feared you, was a slow, soul-crushing punishment. The ultimate consequence, the event that haunted your darkest thoughts, was being sold. After years, perhaps even a lifetime of service, you could be categorized as flawed goods and taken to the auction block. The family you had served, the world you had built, would vanish in an instant. You were no longer the respected steward of a noble Roman house. You were simply a used slave with a mark against your name. Buyers would be wary, asking why such a highly trained individual was being sold. The truth would condemn you to the worst fates the empire had to offer. You could be purchased by the owner of a clay pit or a mine, where life expectancy was measured in months under the relentless sun and the overseer's whip. Or you could find yourself handed over to a gladiator school, your managerial skills utterly useless, your body forced to learn the brutal art of killing for sport until you were inevitably slaughtered in the arena for the crowd's amusement. This was the abyss that lurked beneath your feet every single day. The price of failure was not just the loss of a job, it was the total annihilation of your identity, your safety, and your future, a constant chilling reminder that in the rigid hierarchy of Rome, no amount of responsibility could ever truly grant you security. And yet, for all the immense pressure and the ever-present threat of a terrible downfall, there existed a dream so powerful it could fuel a lifetime of devoted service, a glittering prize held just out of reach that made the relentless toil and the constant anxiety bearable. This was the hope of freedom, the promise of libertas, a word that carried a weight far beyond its simple syllables. For you, the housekeeper, this was not an abstract political concept debated by senators in the forum. It was the most personal and profound aspiration imaginable, the ultimate reward for a life defined by loyal and flawless stewardship. This dream was the silent engine of your ambition, the reason you scrutinized every account, managed every crisis, and bore the heavy burden of command, year after demanding year. The path to this reward was almost never a sudden act of capricious kindness. It was a meticulously managed process, a final transaction in a lifelong relationship built on dependence and trust. The most common and in many ways the most secure method was through the master's last will and testament. After a lifetime of service, your name might finally appear in that sacred document, not as property to be inherited by his heir, but as a person to be released. The phrasing was formal and carried the force of law. Stitius servus meus liberesto, let Stitius my slave be free. Picture the scene after the master's funeral, the reading of the will in the atrium before the assembled family and household. The tension in the air would be palpable. As the scribe read those life-altering words pertaining to you, a wave of overwhelming relief and profound, disorienting joy would wash over you. The decades of unseen labor, the suppressed fears, the endless calculations, all of it was suddenly validated in that single legal declaration. You were no longer an asset, you were a man. But this new status came with its own intricate set of rules and social expectations. Upon being freed, you became a libertus, a freedman. This was a unique and often precarious position in Roman society, a kind of legal limbo between slavery and full citizenship. You were free, but you were not entirely your own master. A powerful, legally recognized bond of obligation, known as obsequium, tied you permanently to your former master, now your patron. This was more than just a vague sense of gratitude. It was a social contract with tangible duties. You were expected to show him public respect, to offer him your political support if he gained the right to vote, and to provide him with a set number of days of labor each year. often during critical periods like the harvest or for a major household project. Failure to honor this obsequium could have serious consequences, including social shaming or even a legal challenge to your freed status. Your freedom, therefore, was not an absolute release, but a transformation of your relationship from one of direct ownership to one of clientage and mutual, though unequal, obligation. Yet within these constraints lay opportunities that were unimaginable under slavery. As a libertus, you could now legally own property. The small savings your patron may have allowed you to accumulate, your peculium officially became yours. You could use it to purchase a small plot of land, a humble shop, or a room in a Roman apartment building. You could enter into legally binding contracts, which meant you could start your own business. Many freedmen leveraged the skills they had honed in servitude to great effect. A housekeeper with a lifetime of experience managing accounts and purchasing goods might become a successful merchant or a money lender. Your ability to read, write, and calculate, rare skills in the ancient world, suddenly became valuable assets you could monetize in the bustling economy of the city. Perhaps the most profoundly personal change was in your family life. Under slavery, any romantic relationship or family unit had no legal standing. Your partner and children were not yours in the eyes of the law. With freedom, you could now marry legally in a recognized union called matrimonium. Any children born to you after your manumission were born free as full Roman citizens, with all the rights and privileges that entailed. This was the most powerful legacy you could ever hope to create. The cycle of hereditary servitude was broken for your lineage. Your son could become a soldier, a merchant, or even, in generations to come, a magistrate. Your daughter could marry a citizen and build a life of her own. This promised the chance to secure a future for your children that was so much brighter than your own past, was perhaps the most potent fuel for the decades of devoted service, a final glorious reward for a life spent in the intricate, demanding, and invisible service of a Roman household. This immense operational control, this mastery of the villa's logistical heartbeat, translated into a form of power that was never officially recorded, but was felt in every corner of the household. Your true authority was not merely the delegated power of the master. It was a subtle, organic influence cultivated through your unique position at the nexus of everything. You held no elected office, your name appeared on no public decree, yet your quiet suggestions and unspoken preferences could shape destinies, forge alliances, and quietly dismantle opposition, making you the villa's ultimate power broker. This hidden influence operated through several distinct but interconnected channels, creating a web of soft power that was both respected and deeply feared by everyone, from the lowliest kitchen scullion to the master's most trusted political advisors. One of your most potent tools was the careful curation of information that reached the master's ears. You were the primary filter through which the daily life of the villa was reported. A junior slave hoping for promotion from cleaning duties to assisting the scribe knew that their ambition hinged on your perception. If you consistently mentioned that slave's diligence, neat handwriting, and quiet demeanor in your morning briefings, the master would begin to associate that name with competence and potential. Conversely, a servant who was lazy or insolent might find that their minor transgressions were never reported until the day a more serious incident occurred and you could calmly inform the master, "This is not the first time, Dominus." There have been a pattern of issues, thereby framing the single event as the culmination of a long-standing character flaw. Your selective reporting could build a reputation for excellence just as easily as it could engineer a downfall, all without you ever issuing a direct command or formal accusation. You understood that reality for the master was often simply the version of events you chose to present to him. This power extended directly into the careers and quality of life of every enslaved individual under the villa's roof. While the master officially held the power of life and death, you controlled the daily reality of existence. You decided work assignments, a power that could be a reward or a punishment in itself. A favored slave, one who had proven particularly loyal or useful to you, might find themselves assigned to pleasant, light duties in the gardens or the textile workshop. A rival or someone you distrusted could be dispatched to the grueling, mind-numbing labor of the fulling mill, where the stench of stale urine used to treat cloth was a permanent, humiliating perfume. You managed the distribution of rations, clothing, and even the small monetary tips from guests, a slightly larger portion of meat, a newer pair of sandals, or the coveted assignment to serve at a lucrative banquet. These were all currencies you controlled. By strategically dispensing these privileges, you could build a cadre of fiercely loyal supporters who owed their comfort directly to you, ensuring that your influence was rooted not just in fear, but in fostered gratitude and mutual self-interest. Your influence also shaped the social and political world beyond the servant hierarchy, subtly affecting the master's own relationships. When important guests were expected, your opinion on the household's readiness was paramount. A discreet comment to the domina such as, "The silver is polished to a brilliant shine and the cook has outdone himself with the songbirds and honey," could set a tone of confident expectation, putting the family at ease. Conversely, a worried frown and a mention that the usual wine merchant has sent a rather sharp vintage this month, and I fear it may not suit Senator Gallus's palate, was enough to trigger a last-minute change of plans. You could even influence which clients received the most favorable treatment. A poet seeking patronage might be kept waiting for hours in a drafty corner of the atrium if you had heard from your network that his flattery was insincere, while a returning military veteran, whose loyalty you knew the master valued, might be ushered in promptly and offered a finer grade of wine. In this way, you became an unseen stage manager for the master's public life, using your control over the domestic environment to gently nudge his perceptions and decisions in directions you deemed most favorable for the households, and by extension, your own stability. The ultimate source of this quiet authority, however, was the universal understanding that you were indispensable. The master relied on you to translate his lofty commands into concrete reality, and he knew that a smooth household was the foundation of his public success. This granted you a unique form of leverage. You could not openly defy him, but you could, through a well-placed sigh or a carefully worded expression of concern, signal when a demand was unreasonable. If he ordered a lavish banquet with only a day's notice, you might respond not with a refusal, but with a detailed list of the immense challenges. Of course, Dominus. I will dispatch riders to Ostia immediately for fresh oysters, though the cost will be high. The kitchens will work through the night, though I cannot promise the pastry will be as delicate as usual. And we will have to pull all the weavers from their looms to help with the decorations, which will set back the new tunics for the household by a full week. In presenting the stark logistical reality, you often allowed him to reconsider his own command, letting him arrive at the conclusion that a less extravagant event might be more prudent. You mastered the art of making your professional judgment feel like his own idea, a subtle dance that preserved his ego while ensuring the villa did not buckle under impossible demands. This delicate balance of influence, built on information, logistics, and perceived indispensability, made you the true steady hand on the tiller of daily life, a force of stability whose quiet power was the hidden engine that kept the entire world of the Roman villa turning. Now let's step back and consider how different this entire experience would be if the villa you managed wasn't a sprawling country estate, but a multi-story city house, a domus, crammed into one of Rome's bustling neighborhoods. While the core responsibilities of a housekeeper remain the same: managing staff, accounts, and security, the daily reality, the pressures, and the very scope of your authority could differ dramatically depending on your postal code. It was a tale of two housekeepers, one breathing the open air of the countryside, the other navigating the claustrophobic, highly scrutinized world of the city. For the housekeeper of a grand country villa, the world was your domain in a literal sense. Your authority stretched far beyond the main residential building, encompassing vast tracts of farmland, olive groves, vineyards, and often entire workshops dedicated to pottery, metalworking, or weaving. This wasn't just managing a household, it was running a small, self-sufficient township. The scale of your operations granted you a level of autonomy that your city counterpart could only dream of. With the master and his family often residing in the city for much of the political season, you were the de facto lord of the manor for months at a time. Your decisions about planting, harvesting, and managing the rural workforce were made with minimal daily oversight. A problem with a broken irrigation, ditch, or a sick ox required your immediate on-the-ground judgment, with no time to send a messenger to Rome and wait for a reply. This fostered a unique breed of housekeeper, one who was as much a farm manager and industrial foreman as a domestic steward, whose success was measured in full granaries and productive workshops as much as in a well-polished atrium. The rhythm of your life was dictated by the sun and the seasons, not by the frantic social calendar of the urban elite. Inside the country villa itself, the very architecture reflected your different reality. These estates were often designed as sprawling, single-level complexes built outward rather than upward, with wings radiating around multiple courtyards and gardens. This horizontal layout created a clear physical separation between the family's luxurious quarters and the noisy, functional areas like the mills, bakeries, and stables. This separation was a luxury that made your job of managing noise, smells, and the flow of people considerably easier. A crisis in the smithy didn't necessarily intrude upon the mistress's afternoon rest. The sheer space also meant dedicated, large-scale storage facilities, massive underground celli for grain, cavernous rooms for oil amphorae, and dedicated sheds for tools. Your logistical challenges were about long-term preservation and large volume management, a stark contrast to the cramped, vertical storage of a city home. Conversely, the housekeeper of a city domus lived and worked under a microscope of social expectation. The Roman elite used their urban homes as their primary stage for political and social advancement, and every detail of your management was a line in their public script. The city domus was not a retreat, it was a weapon in the relentless battle for status, and you were the one ensuring it was always sharp and gleaming. The physical constraints alone were immense. Unlike the sprawling country villa, a city house was a vertical, multi-story building, often sharing walls with neighbors and crammed onto a narrow street. Space was at an absolute premium. There were no distant fields to hide the messier aspects of life. The millstones rumbled, the cooks shouting, the smell of the tannery next door. It was all right there, pressed up against the finely decorated reception rooms. Your greatest managerial challenge was the art of compression and concealment, of creating an illusion of spacious, effortless luxury within a veritable pressure cooker of urban density. This lack of space forced a completely different set of logistical priorities. Large-scale food production was impossible. You couldn't grow your own grain or press your own oil. You were almost entirely dependent on daily trips to the market, making your relationship with merchants and your skill at haggling even more critical to the household's budget. Storage was a constant puzzle. Instead of vast underground cellars, you had to make do with small, cramped storage rooms and cleverly designed cabinets, forcing you to manage supplies on a just-in-time basis. A surplus of grain that would be a virtue in the country was a space-hogging liability in the city. Your entire operation was leaner, more reactive, and far more vulnerable to disruptions in the city's supply chain. A strike by the Porters Guild or a bad storm delaying fishing boats could directly impact your ability to feed the household and entertain guests that very evening. The most defining difference, however, was the unrelenting social pressure. In the country, a visitor was an event. In the city, the stream of clients, patrons, and political allies was a daily torrent from dawn until midday, and the house had to be in a perpetual state of readiness for inspection. The atrium of a city domus was a political lobby, and its condition was a direct reflection of the family's current fortunes. A dusty ancestor bust or a tarnished piece of silver wasn't just a minor oversight, it was a piece of gossip that would be all over the forum by lunchtime, interpreted as a sign of financial trouble or weak management. As the city housekeeper, you lived with the anxiety that a single flaw in your perfect presentation could have tangible political consequences for your master. Your success was measured in the flawless execution of the morning salutatio, the seamless flow of dinner parties, and the maintenance of a public facade so impeccable that it silenced critics and impressed allies. Every day was a performance, and there were no understudies for your role. This intense urban scrutiny even reshaped the nature of your authority over the staff. In a crowded city house, privacy was a rare commodity for both the masters and the servants. Disagreements, romances, and petty jealousies among the enslaved workforce were harder to conceal and had a greater potential to disrupt the household's fragile harmony. A disgruntled cook in a country villa might sulk in a distant kitchen. In a city domus, his bad mood was felt in the adjacent dining room. This required a more diplomatic, hands-on approach to personnel management. You had to be a mediator and a psychologist, constantly smoothing over tensions because you simply didn't have the physical space to separate feuding factions. Your command relied less on the distant authority afforded by a large estate and more on your immediate personal presence and your ability to maintain a fragile peace within a very small, very pressurized world. Now let's bridge the gap between the life you've just lived and the silent stones we walk among today. Your legacy as a villa housekeeper wasn't written on parchment or carved into marble. It was etched into the very objects you used every day, the humble artifacts that now lie buried in the soil, waiting for an archaeologist's trowel to whisper your story back to the world. The most potent symbol of your authority, that heavy ring of iron keys, is one of the most evocative finds. When archaeologists uncover these, often rusted into a single fused mass, they aren't just looking at a piece of metal. They're holding the very instrument of your control, the weight you felt against your hip with every step. The shape and size of the keys can even tell us about the locks they open. Large, complicated keys for the main storerooms and the strongbox, smaller ones for chests and cabinets. Finding a key in the rubble of a service quarter or near a storage room is a direct link to you, the individual who alone possessed the right to turn that lock, a silent testament to the trust and the immense burden you carried. Then there are the tools of your trade, the instruments of your relentless accounting. Your stylus and wax tablets, the brain of the entire villa, are also commonly discovered. The stylus itself, a simple iron or bronze point on one end for scratching and a flat spatula on the other for smoothing the wax, seems unremarkable. But finding one in a context associated with the housekeeper's quarters or the atrium tells a powerful story. Sometimes, if conditions are just right, the wooden backing of the tablet survives, or an impression of the wax remains in the corrosion products of the metal frame. More poignant are the rare surviving wax tablets from places like Vindolanda in Britain or Pompeii, where the actual writing remains. While these are often letters or military records, they give voice to the kind of meticulous lists you would have kept: inventories of grain, records of payments to merchants, notes on rations for the staff. Your entire managerial existence, your command of the villa's economy, depended on this simple technology, and its presence in the archaeological record is the ghost of your daily diligence. The evidence of your economic oversight extends beyond record keeping to the very act of measurement. Archaeologists frequently uncover small, carefully carved stone or bronze weights, along with the delicate balances and scales used to weigh precious commodities. A set of these weights, found in a storage room or near the kitchen, speaks directly to your role as the guarantor of fairness and accuracy. You would have used these scales to verify the weight of a merchant's silver coins before locking them away in the strongbox, or to measure out a precise amount of expensive pepper for the cook, or to ensure a slave receiving their monthly grain ration was given exactly what was due. A discrepancy of a single ounce could represent a significant financial loss or a cause for grievance among the staff. These weights are a powerful symbol of the Roman obsession with order and your personal role in enforcing it. They are a silent argument against chaos, a tiny, tangible representation of the system you upheld. And what of you, the person beyond your duties? While the family flaunted their gold and gemstones, your own identity was marked by more modest, but no less significant, personal items. Excavations of servant quarters sometimes reveal simple but distinct pieces of jewelry: a bronze ring with an intaglio design, a jet or bone bracelet, a fibula brooch used to fasten a cloak. These were not displays of great wealth, but they were declarations of self. A ring, even one made of base metal, was a symbol of personal authority and a cherished possession. A bracelet might have been a gift from a loved one within the household, a token of a relationship that existed in the shadows. These artifacts remind us that you were not just a functionary, you were a human being with personal tastes, relationships, and a desire to adorn yourself, to express an identity that transcended your servile status. Finding such an item in the small, private room of a high-status servant connects us to the individual who lived and loved within those walls. Ultimately, your story is not found in a single grand discovery, but is woven into the very fabric of the villa's ruins. The layout of the building itself tells your tale. The strategic location of the housekeeper's room, often positioned between the master's quarters and the service areas, is a physical manifestation of your role as a bridge between two worlds. The thick walls and reinforced door of the Cella Olaria, the oil storeroom, testify to the value of the goods you protected. The compact, efficient design of the kitchen and its proximity to the dining room speaks to the logistical challenges you solved daily. Even the wear patterns on the threshold of a doorway, smoothed down by countless footsteps of servants you directed, are a silent echo of your command. When we walk through the ruins of a Roman villa today, we are not just walking through the home of a wealthy senator. We are walking through your workplace, the landscape of your life. Every artifact, from the grandest key to the humblest pottery shard, is a piece of the puzzle, and when assembled, they form a remarkably clear picture of the meticulous, powerful, and deeply human figure who truly made the Roman world turn: the villa housekeeper. This life, a world away from the simple image of a menial servant, was ultimately a study in profound contradictions. You existed in a state of perpetual tension, wielding an authority that could be revoked in a heartbeat, commanding a staff you could not legally call your own, and guarding a fortune you could never truly possess. Your identity was split. You were both the chief enforcer of the master's will and the quiet guardian of the slave's fragile morale. You were a trusted confidant who remained, in the eyes of the law, a piece of property. This was not a job of simple tasks, but a role that demanded you be a chief executive, a head accountant, a high priest, and a master spy, all at once. You were the invisible engine that powered the entire opulent machine of the Roman elite, the steady hand on the tiller that kept the vessel of the household from running aground on the rocky shores of financial ruin, social disgrace, or internal rebellion. What remains so compelling about your story is how it completely reshapes our understanding of power in the ancient world. We are accustomed to seeing history through the deeds of emperors and generals, their triumphs carved into marble and stamped onto coins. But your influence, though never officially recorded, was woven into the very fabric of daily life. Your quiet suggestion could make or break a servant's chance at a better position. Your selective reporting could shape the master's perception of his own clients and allies. Your control over the household's logistics and information network granted you a form of soft power that many freeborn Romans would have envied. In a society built on rigid hierarchies, you operated in the fertile, chaotic space between them, proving that true authority is not always about who holds the title, but about who truly understands the mechanisms of control. So the next time you walk through the ruins of an ancient Roman villa, look beyond the grand mosaics and the crumbling columns. Picture the figure moving silently through these spaces, a ring of keys jangling at their hip, a wax tablet in their hand. See the atrium not just as a reception hall, but as a stage they meticulously prepared for the family's daily performance. Imagine the storerooms they secured, the staff they managed, the secrets they kept, and the delicate balance they maintained every single day. The story of the villa housekeeper is a testament to the countless invisible hands that built and sustained the Roman world. It is a reminder that history is not only written by the powerful, but is also lived by the indispensable, the individuals whose quiet competence and complex loyalties truly made the empire function. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of a Roman home and into the life of the person who truly made it a villa. If you enjoyed uncovering this ancient mystery, be sure to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments which other hidden figures from history you would like us to explore next.